December 7th, 1941. The Pacific Ocean was calm that morning. The first light of the sun slowly rose over the island of Oahu, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. The waters surrounding the great American naval base of Pearl Harbor were still and quiet. For the thousands of American sailors stationed there, it felt like an ordinary Sunday. Some men were still asleep after a long week of duty. Others were sitting in mess halls drinking coffee and eating breakfast. A few sailors were writing letters to their families back home, telling them about life in Hawaii and the peaceful days spent in the Pacific. The harbor itself was filled with enormous battleships anchored side by side. These steel giants represented the pride and power of the United States Navy. Crews moved slowly across the decks, performing routine maintenance and preparing for another normal day. Nothing seemed unusual, but thousands of miles away, something was already moving toward them. Far across the Pacific Ocean, a powerful Japanese strike force was advancing silently through the early morning darkness. Hidden within that fleet were 6 aircraft carriers carrying hundreds of aircraft. The ships cut through the waves quietly, careful to remain undetected. On their decks, pilots climbed into their aircraft. Engines began to roar. Their mission had been planned for months. Japan believed that the only way to secure its growing empire in Asia was to neutralize the United States before it could fully enter the war. The world was already engulfed in the chaos of World War II. Germany was dominating Europe, while Japan had expanded across large parts of China and Southeast Asia. But American economic pressure and military presence in the Pacific threatened Japan's ambitions. Japanese leaders feared that war with the United States was inevitable, so they decided to strike first. The mastermind behind the plan was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Unlike many others in Japan's leadership, Yamamoto understood the industrial strength of the United States. He had studied in America and knew how powerful the nation could become if fully mobilized. Yamamoto reportedly warned his government that Japan might run wild for 6 months to a year after attacking America. After that, he feared the outcome. But despite those concerns, the attack plan moved forward. The goal was simple, but incredibly bold. Deliver a massive surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor. Destroy as many ships and aircraft as possible. Cripple American power in the Pacific. Shock the United States so deeply that it would hesitate to enter the war. If the attack succeeded, Japan believed it would gain enough time to strengthen its defenses and secure its empire. But war rarely unfolds exactly as planned. As dawn approached on December 7th, the Japanese strike force reached its launch point roughly 230 miles north of Hawaii. At around 6 in the morning, the first wave of aircraft began taking off from the carriers. One by one, the planes lifted into the sky. Fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers formed large groups as they headed south toward their target. More than 180 aircraft made up the first wave. Their destination, Pearl Harbor. Back in Hawaii, the American sailors had no idea what was coming. Radar operators on the island did detect a large group of incoming aircraft early that morning. But because American bombers were expected to arrive from the mainland that day, the signal was dismissed as friendly. The warning was ignored. Just before 8 a.m., the Japanese aircraft reached the island of Oahu. The pilots could already see the harbor below them. Rows of American battleships sat anchored peacefully in the water. The base was completely unprepared for what was about to happen. At exactly 7:55 a.m., the first bombs began to fall. Within seconds, the quiet harbor exploded into chaos. Japanese dive bombers screamed downward from the sky, releasing their bombs with deadly precision. Torpedo planes flew dangerously low across the water, launching torpedoes directly at the sides of the battleships. Massive explosions ripped through the harbor. Ships shook violently as torpedoes slammed into their hulls. Fire and smoke quickly spread across the water. American sailors rushed out of their quarters in shock and confusion. Many of them had just woken up moments earlier. Some were still in their pajamas when the attack began. At first, some believed the explosions were part of a training exercise. But the sight of Japanese aircraft flying overhead made the truth impossible to ignore. America was under attack. One of the most devastating moments of the morning came when the battleship USS Arizona, BB-39, was struck by an armor-piercing bomb. The bomb penetrated deep into the ship and detonated inside its ammunition magazine. Seconds later, a massive explosion tore through the vessel. A gigantic fireball erupted into the sky, sending debris flying hundreds of feet into the air. The blast destroyed much of the ship instantly. More than 100 sailors aboard the Arizona were killed in just a few seconds. Across the harbor, other ships were also under heavy attack. The battleships Oklahoma, West Virginia, and California were struck by multiple torpedoes. Some ships began to list dangerously as water flooded into their compartments. The USS Oklahoma rolled completely over, trapping hundreds of sailors inside the hull. All around the harbor, men fought desperately to save their ships and their fellow crew members. Some sailors dove into the burning water to escape exploding ships. Others rushed to man anti-aircraft guns, firing wildly at the aircraft above them. Bullets and shells filled the air. Despite the surprise, American defenders began fighting back. Some pilots managed to reach their aircraft and take off from nearby airfields. A few brave fighters engaged the Japanese planes in the sky above the island. But the damage had already been done. The first wave of Japanese aircraft had struck with devastating effectiveness. Yet the attack was not over. Shortly after the first wave pulled away, a second wave of more than 170 aircraft arrived over Pearl Harbor. This time, the focus shifted toward American airfields across Oahu. Rows of American aircraft were parked wing to wing on the ground. This arrangement had been designed to prevent sabotage, but it made them easy targets for bombing and strafing runs. Japanese fighters swept across the airfields, destroying dozens of aircraft before they could even take off. Hangars burst into flames. Runways were filled with wreckage. By the time the second wave completed its attack and began returning to the carriers, the destruction across Pearl Harbor and Oahu was staggering. 8 American battleships had been sunk or heavily damaged. Nearly 200 aircraft had been destroyed. More than 2,400 Americans had been killed. Over 1,000 more were wounded. From a purely tactical perspective, the Japanese attack appeared to be a stunning success. They had achieved complete surprise. They had inflicted enormous damage on the American Pacific Fleet. But despite the devastation, several crucial targets had not been destroyed. Most importantly, the United States aircraft carriers were not in the harbor that morning. Those carriers would later become the backbone of America's naval power in the Pacific. Oil storage facilities and repair docks at Pearl Harbor were also largely untouched. These would allow the United States to recover far more quickly than Japan expected. Even more important than the physical damage was the psychological impact of the attack. Japan had hoped the shock of the attack would weaken American morale. Instead, it had the opposite effect. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before the United States Congress and addressed the nation. His speech would become one of the most famous in American history. He described December 7, 1941, as a date which would live in infamy. Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan. The response was nearly unanimous. Within hours, the United States officially entered World War II. Across the country, the reaction was immediate. Millions of Americans volunteered for military service. Factories rapidly transformed into massive production centers for tanks, ships, aircraft, and weapons. American industry began producing war equipment at an astonishing pace. Shipyards built aircraft carriers and battleships faster than ever before. Aircraft factories rolled out thousands of planes each month. The United States had awakened, and once awakened, it would not stop. Over the next several years, American forces fought a brutal campaign across the Pacific. Island after island became battlefields: Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each battle pushed Japanese forces further back toward their home islands. One of the most decisive turning points came during the Battle of Midway in June 1942. In that battle, the United States destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. The balance of naval power in the Pacific began to shift. Japan would never fully recover from that loss. From that point forward, the United States steadily gained momentum. By 1945, after years of relentless fighting, the war in the Pacific reached its final stage. The conflict ultimately ended following the devastating atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered shortly afterward. Looking back through history, the attack on Pearl Harbor remains one of the most dramatic turning points of the 20th century. What Japan believed would be a decisive strike against American power instead became the catalyst that united an entire nation. The attack awakened the full strength of the United States, its military, its industry, and its determination. December 7th, 1941. The day Japan woke the American giant.